My connection to Weelsby Hall. This is my second time working for Linkage. I used to work here a few years ago when Weelsby Hall was a residential provision for students, and that's where my office was based. And this was where I spent most of my time because this was where most of the students were based. So yeah, that's sort of where I'm at now. My role changed quite frequently, the title of my role, but I was basically head of care for the college residential provision. So in those days we had quite a lot of students who came in and stayed residentially, and I was in charge of all of the accommodation for those students, both here and at our other campus at Spilsby. Well, my job title and my role kind of changed a little bit as well, because when we got a new principal in, my job became assistant principal, and part of that became campus manager. Which sounded really quite glamorous and exciting, but it was more about allocating offices to people and sort of liaising with maintenance and really trying to make sure that the campus, everybody who worked on the campus was where they wanted to be and where they should be. But predominantly it was always around the management of the student accommodation, and that's what I did for about 7 years. I then left, and when that changed, because obviously the funding changed for students in terms of going away from home for college, and we found that quite a lot of the residential provision was no longer required. So I was made redundant along with a lot of other people at that time, and then I came back 8 months ago as head of care to a very different organisation. Yeah. I think the values and the cultures of the organisation are very much similar, but I think it's now become very much more a transparent, business focused. We're very much about making sure that we meet the needs of the people and can evidence what we're doing. We're very compliance focused, so we spend a lot of time making sure that we are doing what we say we're going to be doing. And I think what we've found as well has been a shift in terms of the residential provision now. They seem to be a bit smaller, a bigger move to community supported living. And I think it's just become a very much more focused organisation, but it's still got its values, which is the people are at the centre. And that's why I've come back. Yeah. I've been waiting to come back for a while, but I was waiting for the right job. And this one came up, and then here I am. I think what we find now is that, as sad to say, one of the biggest challenges, financial challenges at the moment with an organisation of this. The local authority have had their funding cut significantly, and that's translated down to care providers who are struggling to meet their financial commitments. We are obviously a charity, and that's part of one of the reasons why I came back, because I wanted to work for a charity. Because I think it's a very different approach. Having worked for a number of companies that were very profit focused, it's refreshing to come back to one that isn't. Yeah. It's still about making sure that the business can run financially, but it is also about doing what's right for the people we support and our staff teams. So yeah, I think generally I think it's the challenges now are it's harder to recruit the right people. That is a massive challenge, and it's hard to often get the level of support that we think people need. Local authorities are very keen to reduce the funding, to maybe not give the hours that they would do historically, and that is a real challenge for us as a support and care provider. It's been really quite refreshing to come back and see there's people still working here. After all those years, that there's people who are working for the organisation that haven't left, that have stayed. They've stayed for a reason, and I think it is around the way that Linkage, it was set up to support people by people who believed that was a need. There was a clear gap in the market for us to do that, and that hasn't changed. And we try to be a little bit unique, a little bit thinking outside of the box, the way that provide the support. But it gets harder and harder as more of a financial pressure kicks in. So no, I do think it's nice to talk to people, the people we support. I think we go a little bit further than most providers, and will do things a little bit differently. But no, it is definitely quite the place I wanted to come back to. and no matter how much it changes, this will be the company that I've wanted to work for quite a few years. When I first started at Linkage, I was obviously I was predominantly within the education department because that's where I worked, and that was the provision I was going to be running. And I do remember on my first day, I'd come in for a couple of days before and met with the vice principal. And on my first day, it was like, oh, well, we're going to go to a meeting. Some of the staff will be there. And I walked into what used to be the Winter Gardens at Cleethorpes, because that's where they had the staff meeting, and there was about 400 staff. And I remember I was asked, would you like to get up and say a few words? I'm like, no, I don't want to. But I did. And I remember saying a few things, and Alison, the vice principal at the time, looked at me and said, oh, you're going to do funny today, are you? I said, yeah, I think I need to. It just calms the mood. But that was my first day, properly. Thank you. it was a sort of a baptism of fire. And I do remember, because I never knew this place was here. Nobody does in Grimsby, unless you work here or you sort of read about it. And you drive up and you think, wow, that's really impressive. And the grounds and the setting. And it's that contributes, I think, to sometimes the calmness of working here, because it can be busy. And to just take that 5 minutes to sit and reflect on what an amazing place to work. And then I moved in, my office was here. Had frequent encounters with George Slight, the ghost of George Slight, I should say.
Well, I think you need to tell us about that.
Well, my office used to be down one of the corridors that I think was more the servants' quarters, towards the back of the building. And I'd come out of my office any time. It'd be a little bit cooler than it was in my office, and the very strong smell of pipe tobacco. And I thought nothing of it. I just thought it was something, maybe some dodgy cooking going on in the kitchen. Or you never knew what was going on in the kitchens here. And I asked, I think it was the registered manager at the time, and she said, oh, that would be George, the late George. And I think I moved offices not long after that. So I don't want to stay down here.
Where was your office?
It was just down the corridor behind us. A small corridor, a small office there. That was the first one. And then I moved briefly up into the tower. Right. I felt like I'd been banished to the tower. Yeah. I moved there for a while. But I'd always tried to, for some reason, I could have had an office up at the new education, but I seemed to quite like staying in this building. This building had such a buzz about it when it was full of students and staff, and there was always something going on. And then, when you come out of your office at 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, you think it was very quiet. Everybody's calm. But there was always a really nice positive feel, which always surprised me, because you put 16 or 17 teenagers in a house together who've never really lived together. It was either going to go one of two ways, and it usually went really well. Yeah. The odd blip every now and then, so that was why I always tried to work from here if I could. And I do come back still occasionally now and try and find a quiet corner. It was like walking into my home again, but it was quite sad because it wasn't what it was. You could see that the years have not been overly kind to Weelsby Hall. And it obviously it's very much what it is. It's a partly used empty building that is in need of some renovation. And then I sort of talking with people about the plans for the hall. It gets very exciting again, because I think there's going to be a new life coming into this building, and that's what it needs. It'd be very easy for this just to decay and not be used, but that would be such a crying shame for the phenomenal features in the building. I mean, I always used to love the lounge at the front with the ceiling, and it started falling down. And then I think those were the rooms that you remember, the sitting in there and sort of sat talking with students and basically just, enjoying the environment and looking out over the grounds, waiting for the deers and the animals to wander by. I think there's been a couple of things. I did some work with Don Mackenzie when we were looking at, we recognised that there was a group of students that were coming to us, but we couldn't really meet their needs because their autism was of such a level that they couldn't engage with the college, they couldn't engage with other students. And one of the things that we wanted to look at was a very bespoke service that was based in a residential property, but was an education provision as well. And we did a lot of work, and I was really proud of how that's, I mean, it's gone now, unfortunately, but it was a needs-led service, specially trained staff, education provision in the building, and it was a stepping stone. And actually, though at the time, when I found out that that service was no longer running, it's actually really nice that some of the people who went there are still at the college, are still at Linkage and living in other residential. So it did work to, you know, I think that was a real achievement for us to actually take that provision and see it through. I mean, there's been lots of things that you think, yeah, that was organising we termed it a healthy activity day on the grounds here. There was myself and a couple of programme managers, but it just turned into a fun day, really. The infamous, there's still a video going around of me on a bucking bronco. It's a very short video, but you know, it's still going around, and you can catch it on YouTube if you really want to have a look. But I think those sort of days were the things that stand out as something that was, yeah, there's a lot of work to do, but it was a real achievement to actually put those sort of things on. And you were allowed to do them. You know, you were given that support to say, yeah, if that's what you think, we'll call it a healthy activity. I'm not sure the hog roast fitted in with that, but it was still a really nice day. And I think that most people enjoyed what we did. It was good fun, but there was learning from it as well. And I think it was that being allowed and having that support to enable us to go and do these sort of things that I really enjoyed. There was a bit of information that was shared around about how, you know, the family that owned the property and how it developed and how the sort of the architect, and you can see other properties around Grimsby that are done by the same architect and the style and everything. But the actual building is you know, I've probably learnt more in the last year or so with the information that's coming out on Facebook group and things like that about the work that's going on to restore it and to celebrate the family that used to live here. You know, you forget sometimes that it was somebody's home. Quite a phenomenal home. But you forget when you work here, and, you know, previously when you're supporting lots of young people to live here, you forget that actually this was a family's home. For the amount of people that were living here was quite phenomenal, and I think that was a lot down to the hard work of the staff to make it as homely as possible. And we still do. I think that's one of the things about Linkage is that creation of that homely environment, so that people. I mean, it's quite difficult. It must be quite difficult to move into a care home or to a supported living environment when you're leaving home or you're leaving school for the first time. And I think it's really important that they get the welcome and the feel that this is their home. And that was always, I mean, this was temporary for students because it was a student accommodation. At most, they'd have been with us for 3 years. Some managed 4 years funding, but for the most, at the end of 3 years, they'd have moved on. But we had lots of different ideas. This place changed its sort of ethos and its model. I mean, we used to support people in their first year, then we changed it to more independent living, you know, but it's always had that flexibility, and the staff team were always up for a challenge. I think it's always remembering that we are being trusted, and it's a huge trust, to look after their loved one, their son, their daughter, brother, sister, and that is a huge responsibility, and I've always taken that as incredibly serious responsibility. And I've tried to get the staff team to get that, you know, to actually say, look after my loved one, takes a huge leap of faith, especially when, you know, it's probably the first time they've moved away from home. And I think we have to value that. It's easily lost, unfortunately, and it's hard work to keep. But we always believe that, you know, I will always be transparent and honest with families. And I think that's crucial, that we won't promise things we can't do. We will apologise if we get it wrong, but we will celebrate our successes hugely. And that's what we should be doing. And I think most families respect that and value that sort of open conversation. There's always, you know, some families are more challenging than others, but that's life. You know, and it's always coming from a position of concern or love for their child, that they want the best. I always think how hard it'd be for my child to go away from home for the first time and think, right, especially if I'm having to rely on somebody else to look after them and meet their needs and keep them safe. You know, who may be very much routine-led in their home and feel safe in there, to then come somewhere like this or one of our other services is hugely challenging. And we have to respect that and make sure that everything we do tries to make it as comfortable and smooth transition as possible. Well, other than my first day, I think one of the most memorable things that I recall is when we were lucky enough to have a visit by Princess Anne. And this was for our official opening of our Mackenzie building, education building. Huge amount of work to get to that point, security checks. But the day arrived and everybody was really excited, and it was decided, I don't know who decided it, that I would meet Princess Anne here in the hallway. Yeah. There was myself and Rex. Incredibly nerve-wracking, because I knew I'd say the wrong thing, or I'd bow or curtsy or do something wrong. There's something to go disastrously wrong, and Rex would be very cool and calm, and I was. But it was such an honour. And it's silly, really. She, was a lady who came to visit us, who's probably, everywhere she goes, she smells fresh paint, because that was, one of the upsides was this whole building got decorated, which was great. But it was a real honour, and she was incredibly pleasant to talk to. She spent a bit of time talking with us and some of the students before she was shown round the newly decorated rooms. But I think that was a real moment that, it's quite a privilege, I think, to be part of that. There's been some really difficult times, incredibly sad times when students have passed away suddenly. What happened then is that as an organisation, we've become so supportive. Whenever you needed help or support, you could ring somebody and they will be there for you, be it one of the directors, the psychologist, anybody, you call them, they will help. And I think that, as difficult as some of those times have been, it wasn't very often over the years, but it did happen. And I think that really saw how much this company then pulled together to support the staff, the family, managers, anybody who needed that level of support. And it's been a roller coaster. I think the changes to funding had a massive impact on, I'll say, my team, the college residential team. We went from being 200 staff to about 40 staff. And that was a massive impact on that team. And then me personally, because, you kind of invest in everybody. You get to know them. You spent years building that team up. And it was out of our control, But there is still people here who are part of that team quite a few years ago. And that's really reassuring to see that. Because people could go and work anywhere. Care jobs are everywhere. So there's something that keeps people here. I'm not been able to put my finger on what everybody talks about, this linkage magic, but it's there. Everybody knows about it, but trying to put it into a sentence is really difficult. So I'm not going to attempt that. Okay. It's just there. It keeps you coming back in it. No matter how tough things are, it keeps you coming back.